Hey believers, so glad that you're here with us, and welcome to Just Ask Jake. That's essentially what this is going to become. I want to introduce you. Of course, my name's Gator. You know Pastor Mark,
G'day,
and
guys.
hopefully you've spent some time with this man. I can't call you Dr. Jake. You get mad at Dr.
Whatever.
Jake? You don't care.
Jake's fine.
He's with Plumline, and we were so blessed to have him share with all of us at The Last Believers. And what you shared it was the first time I'd seen it through a lens of what a complete human looks like. And so can you just kind of, for those that weren't able to be a part of that moment, can you kind of summarize, strength and heart and mind and soul and how that works
Gator.
together? Yeah.
First, thanks for letting me be here.
Yeah.
Super honored to go last night and to share that sacred space together, and really honored to do this too. So appreciate you guys. The vast summary would be the ideas around something I call the spiritual anatomy. And the idea is that just like the physical body has systems, I got a circulatory system, I got a respiratory, so on. And part of what wellness looks like is these systems need to be healthy and nourished and integrated, functioning properly. Well, the spiritual anatomy works like that too. It's got these four systems that make it up, and Jesus referenced these in something he called the Shema, this ancient spiritual framework that he quoted when he was asked, Matthew 22, Mark 12, Luke 10, what is the greatest commandment? He quoted or affirmed, in some cases, the Shema, which is just love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. There's nothing more important than this. So he kind of talked about these four systems in the spiritual anatomy that create the spiritual wellness. Like, in order for me to be healthy and whole and growing and bringing my influence, making the contribution that's mine to make, that will depend on these four critical parts or systems of my spiritual makeup being attached, so they're actually connected, nourished, which means they're healthy, and then accessible, which means I can get to them and other people can get to them, and they can bring the resource that they're intended to bring in my life. So we talked about that system last night.
Yeah, I love it. You gave us a challenge as well, which was to draw a picture of what that looked like.
Yeah.
And if I'm just honest, I'm embarrassed a bit.
Yeah.
Like I was so taken aback because I'm sitting there looking at a blank piece of paper and I didn't know what to draw. Yeah. Because I would think or look at like this aspect of my life, and maybe it's me at work, and I would go, oh, I'm pretty healthy there, right? I'm not letting anybody walk all over me, but I'm confident in what I do because I've been doing it for so long. And so I'm probably good there, but then I think about at home. Sometimes I get too passive and focused on work and forget, hey, I shouldn't just be shoving this stuff for my wife to take care of the finances and just sit back and go, oh, honey, what are you doing? We need to fix this, right? So how do you take that 30,000-foot view of human and then apply that information now to specific areas of your life?
Yeah, well, I just want to validate the complexity of that first, because one of the things we talked about last night is how each of these systems, each of these critical parts of us, when they're not healthy or when they're left in an immature state, they slip down into this thing called the bipolar shadow state, right? That part slips into the shadows and it begins to express or manifest itself in such a way that it's actually harmful, damaging to me, to those I'm with, those types of things. Well, that pole has an active expression when it's unhealthy and a passive expression. And it's possible, I don't know enough about your story to know this to be emphatically true, but it's possible that what you're describing is that if a particular part is less than perfect, less than robust, less than perfectly healthy, and it's somewhere down in that shadow state, at work, the unhealthy manifestation shows up actively, so it's more driven and active, and and at homes, it just kind of makes its way across the continuum, and it shows up more passively, where I just kind of assign this role to my wife, and you do this, and you're only going to hear from me if something's going wrong, and I'm questioning things, or I'm less active with the kid, whatever. And it is a polarity. I'm sliding back and forth across this pole, and maybe the pole is represented by home on the passive side and work on the more active side. But at the end of the day, what's consistent is it's unhealthy. It's in this malnourished state, right? That can make it difficult to go, well, what do I draw? Am I drawing myself at home, or am I drawing myself at work, or what am I going to do to that? And that's kind of where there's just liberty. It's like, well, draw what you want to draw. And there's something, the reason that exercise is so good, there's something about making myself put a pen to the page and go all in on something. It's like, all right, I'm going to draw something on this page, and kind of what comes out. That process unlocks doors in our brain that really can't be accessed any other way. And it doesn't work if I'm typing on a computer, or it's like there's something about putting a pen to the page and making myself draw something that is revealing. Yeah. And then we go, well, why'd you draw it like that? And you're like, I don't know. Like, now we got to have that conversation. We got to drill into that, right? So, but the complexity of it, the difficulty of it, I got paralyzed with this exercise. Yeah. All that makes sense.
Yeah, but it was fun to see a room full of creatives, though.
Yeah, that's right.
After it, like crush it. Yeah.
And 7 weeks ago, I started a weekly deep dive with Jake and into the soul group that you do. And I would say 7 weeks ago, that paper would have been blank for me. And last night I found myself, because the reason why is because we're going through this last 7 weeks, I realized that I was transparent, but really struggled with vulnerability and really struggled with live processing. Mm-hmm. I'd have to go away, figure out the narrative that I could control, and then I would share it. So I could do the drawing in a day, but I couldn't do the drawing in 5 minutes.
I identify with that.
100%. And I feel like that's, and if you can speak into that for a second, the difference between transparency and vulnerability, I feel like to survive, I built this suit of armor that was a permanent suit of armor that protected me, but also distanced me, or created this chasm in the right now live processing, as we've talked about. I felt like, man, I don't know. Like I can't tell you right now what I'm feeling. I can't. And so the suit of armor that protected me also created this dysfunction, or removal from the immediate, my connection to my feelings and what was going on. So vulnerability versus transparency.
Yeah, I love that. I love exploring that, because those two words are often used in a synonymous way. It's like, oh, those are two words that mean the same thing or something. And they couldn't actually be more different. So you think about even visualizing in your mind the word transparency, and then versus vulnerability. And there's a threshold between those two words that's worth exploring. It's not that I'm all one and not the other, or I'm all this one and I'm not that one. It's recognizing the threshold between those two words and being willing to maybe move back and forth as appropriate based on who am I engaging with, and are they safe for me? What is this group's makeup, and what's the purpose of this meeting, and letting that drive whether I'm transparent or vulnerable. And here's the difference for me. Transparent doesn't mean I'm being inauthentic. It's not like I'm showing up as a false self, or I'm performing for you or something like that. It just means I'm very in control of what you see and don't see. So I can be honest and truthful and forthcoming when I'm being transparent. I let you see me in a way that's accurate. But I'm not going to share information with you at a level where you could hurt me. You can leave this conversation and tell somebody else, or you can handle it in such a way that I actually experience harm. Vulnerability, I'm revealing myself, or I'm giving you access to me at a level that I'm vulnerable, and you can actually do me harm. You can hurt me. I had a guy say once, and I said, I'll use that for the rest of my life. He said, transparency is when you live in a glass house. Vulnerability is when you give everybody a stone. Oh. And it's like, all right, you can not only see me now, you can get to me. You can affect me. You can put your hands on me, right?
Which is a scary thing in an industry where you're constantly having to protect yourself from disappointment, comparison, who can I really trust?
Lots of rocks.
Lots of rocks.
Lots of rocks. So, well, that was the thing that I thought, it was not only you sharing, but the conversations that came after as people were leaving, and they were showing each other, here's what my picture looks like, and here's why it is. And I think when you look at the music industry and all the creatives that are in it, from artists to songwriters to music publishing to labels. There's so many different facets of what the music industry makes up. Interesting fact, over 70% of independent musicians struggle with anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues. So I think what you shared really was targeted toward a room full of everybody could go, that's me on some level, and I've never saw it through that lens. So we asked those guys to go, hey, what are you struggling with? What coming out of that big 30,000 foot lens view, what specific questions would you have for Jay? Can I give you a few of those?
Of course.
I think one that fits all of us in the music industry, because on some level you go from CEO or managing people, or you're the boss, or you're on some chain of the music industry at work, and then you have to come home, and all of a sudden you go from CEO to servant, right? As a husband, as a wife. And I know I talk with a lot of artists who go on tour on the weekend, and they're away from their families, and they're in a culture or an environment where everybody is doing stuff for them. Here's your catering, here's this, be here, here's what you do. Like almost they're the kid. Now they got to go in on a Monday and be that for somebody else. That's a serious mental gymnastic flip. How would you give advice on how to handle that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly enough, the transparency versus vulnerability conversation is very relevant here, right? There was a guy named Robin Dunbar. He's a UK sociologist, and he did research on the dynamic of just human relationships. And what he came out with was, just like a human being is limited in terms of how long they can hold their breath underwater, for example, right? It's like maybe Navy SEALs are setting the high bar, and somebody who smokes 12 packs a day is setting the low bar, but there's an average. I can hold my breath so long. I can run a 40-yard dash so fast, right? The same is true of the kinds of relationships that we can have. We are so limited in those we interact, relate with, work with, all the way down to people that we live with, our families, the closest people to us in the world. We've only got so much energy that we can give over to be in relationship. And the number that he came up with, like kind of where human beings tap out in terms of the number of relationships they can have, is 150. That's called the Dunbar number. Like effectively as a human, you are not capable, because of your limitations, to have more than about 150 relationships. And then, so you got to take that 150 and you go, well, I'm not relating to all these 150 in the same way. Yeah. It's right. It's like it breaks down. So what's the breakdown? It's like, well, I think he calls the 150 like the public sphere or something. And the public sphere are people that like you bump into in Walmart. Maybe you know their first name, know something about how many kids they have, maybe what they do for a living. But there's enough relationship there that you would greet them. You can say, oh, Gator, hey man, how you doing? Good to see you. Like, how's your kids? How's work? Great. See you around, right? 150, public sphere. But then it breaks down, and the next sphere in, you have like the 50. And the 50, I think he calls maybe the social sphere. And just by proximity, these are people that, it's not just this random, I bumped into you in Walmart. It's like, I know I'm going to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. because we work together. I know that I'm going to be in a meeting with you once, twice, 3 times a week, and we're going to get into it. Like we're strategizing, we're problem solving, we're looking at spreadsheets, we're making some decisions, all the way to we're in a church small group together. I see you every Wednesday night. I see you every Sunday morning. You come over to my house on Tuesdays for dinner, whatever it is. We're in a Sunday school class, those types of things. And then you go even further than that, and you've got the 15. And the 15 are maybe like your close personal friends. Like we're not just in the small group. We don't just go to church. It's like, no, we try to get together. We try to get the families together once a week, a couple times a month. We go on vacations together. When I have a birthday and it's a small, more intimate affair, you guys are the ones I'm inviting. We're going to a nice restaurant. We're celebrating together, right? The 15.
It's more purposed as opposed to passive relationship.
And it's more vulnerable. Each one in is more vulnerable. And then the most inner circle is your 5. And that's probably your family, or it's your family plus, like, there's wiggle room, right? It's 7, it's 8, it's 3. But it's like, my closest friends, and the control board is off. I'm all the way down here on vulnerability. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's what scares me. Here's where I have need. Like, I need help. I'm exhausted from work. I need you guys to show up for me in this way. Or they're able to do that with you, ask for what they need with you. I'm scared, Dad, about the bully at school. Or will you read me a story? I need connection with you, those types of things. Well, you'd never consider reading the story to somebody or helping at their place of vulnerability. Somebody in your 150, like you bump into, it's like the dude that helps you move that you barely know in Walmart. It's like, no, dude, we're not moving friends. I'm not picking you up at the airport. Like, that's not the nature of our relationship, right? So you put that in the context of like, well, I work, I'm this high-powered CEO in the music industry, whatever it is. I got people that do things for me. That is a relationship that goes beyond just like bumping in at Walmart. It's very defined. It's like, I've got a role to play in your life, and it's to lead this company well because your family's depending on it. So I need to do my job well, but at some level, we're not in this vulnerable relationship. I'm not gonna, like, one of my biggest frustrations is when people talking about their work culture is a family. We're a family. We're there. It's like, that is so unkind to work colleagues. It's very confusing. It's like, so am I supposed to knock on your office door, CEO, when my grandma died? And talk about, like, I'm so sad, it hurts. She's more like my mom. She raised me. It's crushing me. I'm having trouble focusing. Like, that is not the CEO's role at that level of 50 in your life. And it's not, an appropriate person for you to go through with that stuff. His job is to be really clear with you about what your role is, to be really clear with you about when you're doing that role well, to be really clear with you when you're not doing so well, to put performance plans in place to help you improve, to be honest and speak the truth to you about your role in the organization, if what you need to do to be advanced, and we might have to demote you or even let you go. Like, this is the 50 relationship when it's there. Well, if you go home and you're bringing those same dynamics into the family, that is awful. Like, treating your children like that, for example. Here's what you're doing well. Here's what you need to improve on. Let's give you a performance plan. My role in your life is just to provide a good living for you, to put food on the table for you, to put clothes on your back and a roof over your head. And like, that's going to feel really detached and disconnected when it goes from being a CEO that's responsible to run a business really well versus being a great husband or a great father. So all of a sudden, like, there's a lot more vulnerability, emotional vulnerability and emotional accessibility that's required inside your home than when you're being a CEO, right? And the problem is when you try to be the same for both. And I constantly work with people who will sit in my office and go, well, I'm so respected and admired and loved in my job, but then my wife or then my kid, and I'm going, yeah, those are different relationships. Yeah. It's a lot easier to go and just be transactional and do your job and they do their job and you just like this transactional thing at work. That is a very inappropriate relationship in the home, and it's a lot more complex in the home. Because whether you're performing or not in my home, I ain't going anywhere, and neither are you. So now it's about like me holding that space and being with you and supporting you, being nurturing and that kind of stuff. That's not how you perform this role. So they're very different contexts.
I mean, that's such a helpful framework of seeing this group, and that group, because I think that is the big struggle, is we just keep the same hat on. And it's like, man, I want that same respect but it's completely different. And I love the fact that the Bible does such a good job. It is ultimate, absolute truth. And so Dunbar's number, for example, I look and go, okay, where's the tether back to the word? We see that. Well, you do see it. You see it with Jesus. You see, and it may be like you've got the crowds, and whether that's the 150 or beyond, but then you've got the 72 disciples that he sends out that you hear less about, but they're there. The 72 are clearly there and a part of it, and he's sowing in, investing, and there's a certain type of relationship. Then you have the 12. Yes. And of course, Peter, James, and John, the three. Yep, that's right. And so what I love so much about that is it feels spirit truth, yes. That framework to work from of like, he was different with John. Yes. John was like reclining on
that's right.
him.
That's intimate.
That's intimate. That's like, he's lying on Jesus. Yes. Like John was the one, I'm the one Jesus loves. Yes. And that wasn't said by any of the other disciples, even though I'm sure they felt it to different degrees. And so I think that the vulnerability and figuring out, how do you switch though? Like, is it like, do you see it like as hats? I'm wearing this hat and I go, how do you make that switch? Is it an emotional decision, reset, okay, here we go? How do you think is the healthy way of switching those?
I think the issue here is it's not an issue of like, I need to switch my role. It's not an issue of I need to find the time. It's an issue of relational energy. And I think what happens is when there's confusion around what kind of relational energy am I supposed to bring as a CEO to the C-suite? What kind of emotional energy am I supposed to bring to this artist that we're trying to launch? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When there's confusion around, well, we're not just work colleagues, we're a family, and you start bringing a more vulnerable, less armored up emotional energy to your workplace, that energy is being spent. Your tank is being drained. And then guess what? You go home and your kids are going, well, you're reading me a story. Your wife is going, can you help do the dang dishes, please? Or whatever it is. And you've got nothing left because you misused the relational energy and you ignored the fact that you're a human being that only has so much. I think the focus has to become allowing this concept to inform who gets what from me. Right? Because I've only got so much. So who gets what from me? And I'm going to appropriately engage with people that I work with. I actually, had a person at one point that was working for me and said after a tactical meeting one day, I just want you to know that I see you more as a father than I do as a boss. And everything within me went, whoa. Yeah. And I actually addressed it in the meeting and I said, I am not your dad. I'm not your dad. I'm not here for you like a father is. I said, my role in your life is your boss. And my intention with you is I'm going to be the best boss I know how to be for you. I'm going to bring you my best when it comes to being your boss. I will evaluate you as honestly as I know how. I will give you support with the tasks and responsibilities that we pay you for. I will pay you as well as we can for bringing the value that you bring to this business and helping us advance our vision and our goals. I do care about what's going on in your life personally. Like, we want to invest from an HR perspective in therapy and time off and vacations, and because we do value you as a person. But when it comes to the relational and emotional energy that is appropriate for me to give you, I'm going to give you the energy of a transactional boss who's as healthy as I know how, but you're not going to get the emotional energy of a father from me. And if you're hanging that role of responsibility on me as your boss, that's a problem. And if I'm offering that to you as a CEO in some weird attempt to create a healthy culture that ironically is about the most unhealthy culture you could possibly create because it's confusing, all that's an issue. The moment I right size where the energy is going, guess what? I have more energy to bring to my wife and to my son that's that more vulnerable, more accessible energy because I didn't spend it. Allowing a 2-hour meeting to happen with a direct report where I'm playing the role of a therapist or a pastor or a father, and that is not an appropriate role for me to be playing in their life. So last thing I want to say about this. It frustrates me to no end when people talk about that threshold between transparency and vulnerability, and they get so frustrated, like they're going, people ask you at work, how you doing? Or they bump into you at Walmart and they go there, how you doing? And we say we're fine, but we are not fine. Yeah. And they're like trying to create some weird value system that you're supposed to like give them all your dirty laundry in the aisle at Walmart or in the tactical meeting or something. And you're not. You know what you're supposed to say in Walmart? I'm fine. And here's why I'm fine. Number one, we're in Walmart, not an appropriate place for a counseling session or even a deep friendship connection. Number two, you're probably not qualified to actually be in that anyway. That's not the nature of our relationship. And number three, I do have people in my life who fulfill that role, and you ain't it. So knowing I can go get my needs met with the people that I've selected and who have earned my trust and who are qualified to do it, means that even if everything is not hunky-dory for me in the aisle at Walmart or in my check-in meeting, which is not even about how I'm doing emotionally or spiritually, it's about my job, like, I'm fine. I'm fine, So that's what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to be transparent, not vulnerable. So don't walk around without your armor on. At work or in Walmart, you're supposed to be armored up. The danger is you would never take off the armor with anyone, and that's missing it on the other side. There's got to be those small controlled circles where you can take off the armor and you can go, I'm scared to death, I'm hurt, I'm lonely, I feel shame. And that's a very small and controlled group. And
You'd never walk around Walmart naked. You would not. I mean,
There was that one time, but no, you're right. You wouldn't.
And if you do, you go to jail. It's inappropriate.
You know, your wife, sure, no worries. Not all the time, even. Because it's a bit weird. But it's just there's appropriate levels, and I wouldn't really answer my door to my neighbor with my shirt off.
Yeah. Even that.
Just kind of a little bit. It's like, oh, hello. But it's just figuring out. I love that there's the layers of between transparency and vulnerability of appropriateness, and taking those layers off. So
yeah, it's super insightful.
Good, man.
And I'm feeling a little guilty because I have a group. So I work in a major company, thousands of employees, but I've got a group of about 5, 6, 7 of us. And we do family meetings. And I'm going, oh, Jake's talking about me on some level.
And I'm talking about me too.
I know.
Because I've done it too.
So let's talk about another issue. And I almost feel like these two things may go together. Balancing the dream with your financial survival, because we live in Music City where everybody comes here to buy a country music lottery or a Christian music lottery. And it's not always easy. And it's certainly more people fail than succeed. So those lines, very pointed. Am I actually pleasing God by chasing a dream as a performer? There's an element of satisfaction and affirmation I receive that fulfills me. Can that coexist with God's plan for me?
Yes, as long as one word is true for the person, and that word is surrender. And what surrender means is I've released the outcomes. Like, I'm not going to try and control or force the outcome. And if the specific outcome that I'm after doesn't come to fruition, I'm an utter and complete failure. God was not faithful to me and his promises. Like, surrender is I'm going to step faithfully into what my longings, my ache, my vision, my dreams are. And I'm going to surrender the outcome. You know, that's the key to those two things coexisting. Yeah.
Well, and I love talking with someone specific that was talking about balancing biblical contentment with this need to, fulfill a dream or drive a dream. And Mark, we had a side conversation, but I love how you shared that motive is the key in those scenarios.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've experienced in my life and had to detox from is running on dirty fuel, what I call dirty fuel, which is motivations that aren't quite pure but get the job done. And you allow those things to kind of, it's okay because it's helping me, whether it's comparison or competition or ambition. And I think as I've processed that personally, the difference between kingdom ambition, which is attached to the purpose of God on your life and the calling, versus selfish ambition. Yeah. And there's a huge difference between that. And James 3 points this out really clearly in verse 13. Says, who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy, which is a big deal in the music industry and even just in the church world, like this is something that human nature we deal with, but especially here, bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts. Do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above. It's not heavenly wisdom, godly wisdom, but it is earthly, unspiritual, and even goes to say demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy, good fruits, impartial and sincere. And so I think, man, I'm human, but I'm aware that I cannot run on this dirty fuel continually. My engines can't survive that long term and longevity. And so I'm on this journey for longevity. I've seen too many pastors, too many leaders not make it. You know, you talked about last night, 7 out of 10 Christian leaders do not finish well. And my heart is, man, if we know this to be true, recent studies, what are we doing about it? And I'm hunting, actively opening, surrendering to this detox process of, God, I kill the selfish ambition in me. Here it is. Where is it? And, you know, having conversations of soul conversations, heart conversations. So what would you say, speak into that just a little bit of just, yeah.
So one of my favorite all-time movie characters is Luke Skywalker.
Let's go.
And one of the most powerful Jedis that ever lived, right? What I love so much about Luke Skywalker is how aware he was of the dark side in him. He's like, God, it is like, he's like, it's in me. Like, it's in me. I feel the pull. And his greatest fear, am I going to give into this dark side like my dad did? You know, so, spoiler alert, Darth Vader's Luke's dad. Sorry if I ruined that for anybody. But like, am I going to give into this dark side like my dad did? That was his biggest fear. So all modern psychology is standing on the shoulders of two men, Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, okay? And I tend to lean more Jungian than I do Freudian. Freud said, we got to kill it. Like this darkness in us, this shadow self, these shadow missions, we got to kill it. Like, you know. Jung said, we got to integrate it. So like, instead of exercising the demons, you know, I don't mean literal demons. We need to exercise literal demons. But like, you know, those shadow missions, the selfish ambition, there's this pure dream that wants to honor God and grow a platform to make his name great and spread the kingdom. But then there's also a little something in me, like this bumped around in me even when I was a pastor, right? I would take the stage to preach God's word, and everything within me wanted to advance the glory of God, wanted to genuinely unlock the beauty of the scriptures, wanted to inspire people to be better, you know, musicians and artists and husbands and fathers and like all these things. And I wanted, when I walked on the stage, inside of people deep to go, yes, Jake's up today. He's my favorite, you know? And wow, this guy is so smart. And man, he's funny. And gosh, we like him. And that was in me too. I cannot deny it. Both were in there. And so most people you know, yourself included, are not good or bad. But they consist of light and shadow. And I think what Yoon is getting at is you actually can't get rid of the shadow. And if you try, you will go crazy. But the goal then becomes, well, what do I do with all this shadow mission that's true in me? You become aware of it. You take ownership of it. Like, I can own my light, but I'm also going to own my shadow like I just did. This is in me. And if we can begin to converse with the shadow self, like, what's going on inside of you, shadow self? Like, what are you thinking today? What are your motivations? What's driving you to want to write this song or you know, to cut this artist or what, like, you know? There's this other thing in us too that's not the light either. It's part of the shadow called the ideal self. It's who you'd be if you're perfect. And we're working hard to build that image or become that person, right? What's going on in you, ideal self? Like, what do you want people to see? And what do you want, like, what do you want to achieve? And you start to engage in conversation with these two constructs inside of you, your shadow self and your ideal self. Well, who's the one having that conversation? It's me. Who's me? It's my true self who's able to go, I know this is in me, and I know that's in me too, and neither one of you are going to lead my life. Neither one of you are going to write this song. Neither one of you are going to make this business decision. I'm the guy that's going to do that. I'm the guy that's telling you how it's going to be and you how it's going to be. And this is the guy that's actually connected to God. you know, and is being called and empowered and is willing to surrender. This guy's not willing to surrender, and neither is this one. This guy's willing to release the outcomes and go, I'm just going to be faithful to what God's calling me to do.
So Romans 7, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
Paul has this.
He's got it in him.
He has this
What do I
shadow
do?
part of him he reveals and he shows and he's in touch with. He recognizes. He's not trying to kill it. He's just going, I'm trying to have this dialogue and you know, I'll read it.
It's beautiful.
It says in verse 15, I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I don't do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree the law is good. As it is no longer I myself who do it, my true self, but it is sin living. It's the shadow self living in me. And then he says, goes on, he continues to agonize over this. And in verse 24, he says, what a wretched man I am. Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord, the grace giver. And if our ideal self, as you begin to teach me, the grace giver needs to give, the ideal self needs to take the cues from the grace giver, not the shadow self or ideal self. And that was mind-blowing, because that interfacing and learning how to do that internally, and what I love about Romans 8 goes on to say it's like life by the Spirit, living by the Spirit is life, right? Listening to the grace giver versus living by the flesh is death. And so, powerful thought.
I do have a story here if we have time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So when I was kind of having a bit of a career change, went from 21 years being a pastor to, you know, this spiritual formation company called Plumline, I went away on a silent retreat before I, kind of in this limbic space between pastoring and starting this new business. And I did it at a monastery in Kentucky called the Abbey of Our Lady Gethsemane, right? So I went and was staying with the monks. Wow. It was a silent retreat. And if you've ever heard of Thomas Merton, this is where Merton was placed. So it's where he lived. And you can actually journey out into the woods to this single room stone house where Merton lived, okay? And of course it's, the windows in this little one room place are long gone. The door is long gone. If you walk inside, it's one room, small, with a little fireplace in there, right? And I'm standing in this room where Merton lived, and the cobblestone floor is just littered with dirt and leaves. And I look up, and there's this broom leaning against the wall. And something in me, like, is it God's Spirit? Was it just an idea I had? You know, I'm not exactly sure. But the way God speaks is deeper than language, deeper than the thoughts in our head. It's kind of down here, and it comes with just impressions and senses and promptings. I get this prompting, sweep out this house. Wow. Right? So I get the broom and I start sweeping, okay? And these leaves are piling up and dirt's kind of filtering into the air. And this second impression kind of comes as I'm sweeping out this house. And the impression is this question: why are you doing this? Okay. So I'm sweeping and I go, well, I'm talking back to the Spirit, I think. So I'm doing this because you asked me to. Keep sweeping, get about halfway done. Another prompting. Do you need to be recognized for doing this? I was like, wow. No, I don't need anybody to know I'm doing this. I'm happy to just do it, you know. Okay, keep sweeping. Get about 75% done, and another prompting. Do you need to get paid? You need compensation for sweeping out the house? I'm like, nope, I'm good. I'm okay just to be assigned the task and to do the task. I don't need any compensation for this, you know. And I kind of finish and I look back over this now clean floor of Merton's old house. And I sense the Spirit say to me, this is how I want us to work together from now on. Just do it because I asked you to. Don't worry about recognition or acknowledgement. That's a distraction and you don't need it. Wow. Don't worry about getting paid or where the money's going to come from. I got you. Can we work like this? And I said, I think so.
Which is the right answer.
My shadow was going crazy. My ideal self was going crazy, but the true self said, I think so.
I want to.
I want to. I want to. You know.
I think that's the goal,
Yeah.
right? That's the goal for anybody watching, and no matter what your profession, no matter where you're at, I think it's checking those motives, being aware of the shadow self, and ultimately trying to surrender to the
And
Spirit.
that's what we see in the Romans 7 is it's not perfection.
Yeah.
It's not even really that good. He says, I hate a lot of what I'm doing. But that the wrestle is indicative of a true desire.
Yes.
And so when we lose the desire, like I want to, even though I want recognition, that the credit thing's, man, it's
So hard.
so tough to again, not kill, but to integrate, to converse with, to submit and surrender to God, to purify constantly. But that desire, I just want to pinpoint that. It's like Paul's saying, man, I have a pure heart. I want to do it just because it's right, not for credit, not for, compensation. And I think just finishing and kind of exclamation point on that point is like, God, purify our hearts as believers in an industry that is so ravenous for compensation and for recognition and all that kind of stuff. Of even though we may stumble, we may not fall because of the desire to be like Christ. And so there's grace when we're weak, and He's strong in that. But man, that desire is so important, not to give in to shadow self, not to give in to ideal self, but to take our cues from the grace giver who will save me from the wretched man I am.
Yes.
Christ Jesus alone.
Yes.
So
I feel like our goal is to go deeper, but I feel like we're just ankle deep, right? And we could have so many conversations, so many questions.
Yeah.
And I think the good news is we have people like Jake and the work that you're doing at Plumbline, and lots of names and resources on the resource center or site, part of the site of thebelievers.life that you can check out, you can investigate, you can ask me and Mark. Our goal is to connect you to the help that you need, no matter what that help is. Is there anything that we missed or should address, or any closing thoughts?
I think jumping in this next session with Drew, I think as we keep diving in, this is a perfect foundation. It's almost like chapter 1, and I'm excited to turn the page to chapter 2. So
Yeah.
thank you, Dr. J.
Appreciate
You're welcome.
you. Appreciate your heart. Appreciate
Glad
your
to be here.
ministry. And yeah, you mentioned we're going to sit down with artist Drew Parker and really, hopefully, get transparent and vulnerable. So check that out. And again, all the resources, your connection point is always at thebelievers.life.